Hi, Guillaume Kuster, and thank you very much for joining today's conversation. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really good.
Thank you very much for joining. So, look, let's start with the basics. What's Operation Overload, and what was its primary objectives?
So what we ended up calling Operation Overload is a large-scale operation targeting journalists and fact-checkers, feeding them with fake content that is aligned with a pro-Russian agenda, mostly anti-Ukraine, sometimes also anti-France, as being a strong supporter of Ukraine. And the way the operation has been unfolded is threefold. There was a piece of the operation on X, formerly Twitter, another one on Telegram, and then a bunch of direct emails that were sent to newsrooms. And that's actually how we came across the operation, by being ourselves recipients of these emails. And typically you would see an email that looks like a concerned citizen that spotted some pro-Russian fake news and, benevolently sent it to the newsroom saying, hey, I saw that on pro-Russian channels, on Telegram mostly, sometimes on X, sometimes on some websites. Can you have a look? And, with a Gmail address and where we figured out to be made up names, but at the first read, it really seems like someone concerned about what they saw and asking for journalistic verification of the contents of what they saw, which can be pictures of graffitis in Paris, Berlin, or elsewhere. Could be videos with logos of European media organizations. Could be screenshots of media websites that are technically quite well executed. And when we saw these emails, they looked a bit fishy because we had collections of links rather than just one link to one asset. And these collections of links, usually pointing to Telegram at first, they pointed to different forms or variations around the same fake asset. So to give you an example, you would have a picture of a wall in Paris with a graffiti on it that is, let's say, anti-Zelensky, and you would have another picture from a different angle. You would then have a screenshot, which ends up to be a fake screenshot of, let's say, the French journal Le Parisien, and then you would have a fake screenshot of an Instagram story, all featuring the same graffiti. So that is something quite important in the what we dubbed Operation Overload, which is a concept called content amalgamation, which we think is a way for the perpetrators to enhance the perceived likelihood of the existence of these fake assets. So the more pieces of content sort of corroborate that graffiti, the more believable it becomes to not the general public, but the journalists. And that's the originality of the operation, is the target of the operation. Mainly we listed over 200 targeted entities in the world, mostly Europe, where you would have newsrooms and fact-checkers being both the recipients of these emails, but also sometimes mentioned on social media, on X, formerly Twitter. And as Rogan mentions, we counted like several thousand of them for these entities. So the idea was really quite scarcely at first, like a few times a week, send some fake assets, like pretend that I'm an alarmed citizen and I really want you to fact check something. And we believe that effort is a way to have fact checkers and journalists waste time and resources to fact check something that nobody really saw. And that's quite interesting because we've seen operations in the past where the target audience were not the journalists but the general audience in the end. So the operatives would use social media and fake accounts to try to gain some virality and by spreading these assets and trying to manipulate opinions in this way. But here we can see that they are trying to use journalists as a pivot, and following the principle of there is no bad publicity, all publicity is good, even if the assets are debunked. If the graffiti is funny, there's a risk that the general audience that will read the fact check will remember that funny line. And that is something that they masterfully have been using to adapt the fake content to local audiences, both in terms of language, but also cultural references, using, as France was a massive target of the operation, they were using traits of French humor that are quite exclusive to the country, that wouldn't really make other countries laugh, but which align with a French citizen or reader. So, and I'm French. I have to be honest. Some of them really had me laugh because they were well crafted. But then you have to think about the repercussions of that. Using that kind of assets so masterfully and trying to bet on the connection that you can establish with the end audience, despite the assets being labeled with a big red fake or a cross, is quite ingenious.
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of things here that you mentioned that are quite interesting, right? One is the technique itself. The other one is the craft of the content, right? So I think that those two layers, let's put it this way, or these two different phases of the same operation, it's what makes this operation quite unique, as you were mentioning, and also as it is stated also in the extensive report that CheckFirst published recently about this operation. I want to stop for a second in this production of content, right? Because if those emails included links, right? The emails sent to the news outlets and to the fact checkers included links. Those links need to link to some content. Let's put it this way, right? So there was already like an effort of producing massively content, and distribute it across different channels to create this feeling among the fact checkers and the news outlets that people were talking about it, that this was a topic that was trending, even if it was fake, like probably it was fake on purpose and precisely to draw the attention, right, of the fact checkers and the news outlets. So let's start a little bit on the content. Can you describe like the different layers of distribution and how and where do you think that this content originated?
So absolutely, you're right to saying that there are two remarkable aspects. One being content creation, the other one being distribution. So if we look at the content creation, what was particularly remarkable and something we've noticed with resets, we also helped write the report and was really keen to building this report, is how close they were able to produce content to the news cycle. So if you had something that could be exploited in the news cycle, and I'll give you an example, as you might know, to prepare for the Olympics in Paris, the Seine River has been the subject of huge amounts of work to clean the water. And there was, in April, some NGO that did some testing of the water quality in Paris, saying it wasn't on par and it wouldn't be suitable to have the Olympic swimming competition happen if nothing changed until then. And that, it made a little, it was a subject of contention in the French media for a few days. And just a few days after that, the operatives of the Operation Overload, they created fake assets related to that instance in French, directly, trying to piggyback onto the news cycle around that story. So they were able to pick up some items in the news cycle, try to create assets that would stick into people's minds using cultural references. And just to continue on the same example, they were using the famous three-eyed fish from The Simpsons that normally swims into nuclear wastewaters. and there was a comic text bubble saying the Seine River is all clean. So it was a form of usage of humoristic talent, but also knowing that The Simpsons were widely broadcast in France, and it's a known reference for the French. And the tone of the text bubble sounded really French and could have been appealing. And that fake graffiti was just superimposed on a bank of the Seine River. And you would have several pictures looking at that. So that made us think, okay, so they are able, A, to react to the content found in the news cycle, B, to creatively create assets, probably involving either people who know French culture quite well or the target audience quite well, or French operatives themselves that were recruited for the operation, and then technically also achieve a level of execution that is quite high and much higher than what we had seen in the past. Because when you look at the fake image, you wouldn't detect a fake. It seems very believable. And just today, I saw some others on the famous Champs-Élysées in Paris, where fake stickers were superimposed on the on road signs, and that looked also very believable. That we could establish, thanks to the help of the University of Ghent, specialized into image forensics, that there's a high likelihood of image manipulation for those. So yes, they are quite apt at creating these fake assets. Also to hit the bullseye culturally in terms of aligning with the target audience, and be quite excellent at technical execution of the fake assets. It doesn't smell like, oh, that's Photoshop. Really, especially given the fact that you would have multiple angles and the manipulation of the same graffiti onto different pictures that we think do not stem from Google Maps or another service but that some operatives, they took pictures to prepare for that transformation. So they had people in Paris maybe taking these pictures, that's what we think, and then process these images to superimpose the fake assets. So that content creation part, you could see that they are one step above what we had seen before. There's another type of content creation which reuses and manipulates existing assets. So to give you another example, still in Paris, there was an attack on a luxury shop somewhere in the city where a car destroyed the facade of the building. And that made news. So some videos were created by news anchors. And some of these videos were downloaded and they just changed 2 shots. And to give you in the original story, we didn't know who ran into the shop and stole the items. But in the pro-Russian version, they added a shot saying, and by the way, there were surveillance cameras and Ukrainian refugees were the authors of the steal. So there were, but apart from these 2 shots, the rest of the video, including the media logo, in that instance, the famous French newspaper Le Figaro, everything was the same. They just altered basically 10 seconds of footage that they created for the purpose of their fake video, and that also was produced within 48 hours of the real event. So it's really sticking to the news cycle, and it's really trying to convince the recipients that they are, they want to create a sense of urgency, as you mentioned, saying, hey, there's stuff happening out there, even though when you look at the figures, all these assets are posted on channels that are controlled by the operatives, meaning that the general public didn't really see them and they mostly flew under the radar. These are some obscure Telegram groups, some X accounts that are either shadow banned already or because they were detected into other operations that are recycled, or freshly created accounts that have no audience at all. And that's when we start to talk about the dissemination technique, which is quite clever. So we've established how they create content. And once, these 5, 6, 7 assets around the same idea exist, they need to exist online for journalists and fact checkers to be pointed at them. So what they do is they control a bunch of Telegram channels, they control a bunch of X accounts, and they control a bunch of websites, including the ones from the Portal Combat network that was uncovered at the beginning of the year by the French government agency Viginim. And what they would do is they would post arrays of these 5, 6, 7 versions around the same ideas on these different outlets, and that gives them basically a bunch of links to include in the email that they will send to the newsrooms, and that's what we call content amalgamation. What's particularly interesting into that, and also helped us understand the mechanics and the goal, is that you would have a lot of hosting on these controlled platforms, and as soon as a fact checker or newsroom publishes something, they stop. So that shows that the end goal has been reached, and that the exposure of the wider exposure of their assets through media channels was pressed on. And they possibly a few weeks after that would try again to repost, but we have a graph like that in the report showing like there's a start progression of the number of publications on these control channels, and it's all of a sudden stops whenever there's something in the news media about, even if it's labeled as fake and it was fact checked. And one particular instance that really convinced us of the intention was an actual email exchange in between a German journalist from Correctiv, a fact-checking entity, where they had fact-checked what was sent to them via email, and they politely replied saying, "Hey, we fact-checked it, it's false, and here's why." And the answer from the operatives were, "Oh, great, can you make sure that the maximum amount of people see your work," which is kind of saying, yeah, please show that to the most, the biggest number possible, so that our content is troubling.
It is very interesting because first, with regard to the content, right, clearly indicates, or at least the pace that the content was first created, but then later on distributed through different channels, and different layers of distribution, right, clearly indicates some sort of coordination, right? And then the fact that all these this dissemination of those specific false pieces of false content reach the goal, which is like depleting the resources of fact checkers and news outlets, reach was successful, then they would stop, right? What I find interesting, it's these emails sent to the fact checkers, because our audience also need to understand that when fact checkers and news outlets confront for the first time, an email that they received, like an actually very credible email, because our audience can actually go and visit the report that CheckFirst has published, and where you guys have screenshots of the real emails that the fact checkers were receiving. So our audience also need to understand that a fact checker or a journalist, when confronted to this kind of email, whether they want to investigate it or not, they first need to assess whether they need to conduct an investigation or not. And that per se includes time and includes resources, right, that are not allocated to actually fact check other kind of false news and disinformation narratives, right? So I want to dive a little bit deeper with you, if that's okay, into these emails sent to the fact checkers and the newsroom. So you were mentioning before that you collected a total of more than 200 instances of these emails, distributed at least across 20 news and fact checking outlets. How did it work?
The data collection, or So the data collection.
Yeah, exactly. Both the data collection, but also the analysis. How did you start, analyzing these emails, and also there's a part of it that you've already mentioned, this domain analysis as well,
Yeah.
from X, Telegram's accounts, and so on. So can you walk us through your investigation? How did you start pulling the thread, from the first emails, and because also in the report you have sort of kind of a description of the of a prototype of these emails that you've been able to pull together out of these more than, I guess, 200 instances. So yeah, please walk us through.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to mention, one of the purposes of that report was precisely to help fact checkers and journalists to recognize these emails and to ignore them, but keep collecting them for further analysis and rather report in the bigger picture rather than on the individual instances of fake content, which they have done because, as you might know, the report has quite a large dissemination. So pulling the thread, I have to say that wasn't the hard part because we received the email. So basically, the operation was kind of delivered to us on a silver plate. What was a bit more tricky was to convince everybody quickly to participate into the operation and to the study. And we have good relationship with a lot of fact checkers in newsrooms in Europe, but also with EU Disinfo Lab, which is an NGO based in Brussels. We have an even wider network, and they helped us loop in a lot of newsrooms and fact-checking entities to offer to participate, because our first sort of reflex was to ask around to our friends, hey, did you also receive these strange emails? And oh yeah, okay, you too. Let's try to gather them essentially and to try to see if we find something to dig up from there. And Eugene Lab organized basically a bunch of meetings, online meetings with most of the more than the stakeholders that ended up collaborating, but almost everybody wanted to play ball with us because they were also asking themselves some questions about these emails, and some of them even published some fact checks because when we don't really know where it comes from and you don't talk to your neighbors, then we do work and we end up wasting time, but you don't know that you're wasting time at the very beginning of the operation. So we convinced, with the help of the NGO, to about 20 fact-checking organizations, even some that started to work and tried to pull the thread, thinking also that there was something fishy behind the emails. But when we demonstrated what we had found, everybody just chipped in, basically saying, okay, you guys have more stuff, so let's just put everything in the same pile. And that that created the collection of over 200 instances of the emails, and in a matter of weeks, and we started then to compare links that were featured into the emails, trying to see if they were coming from the same senders, if they had the same topic line, if they had the same body, and trying basically to group them and collect all the links to assets that exist, and then analyzing the assets behind the links. It's really a fairly run-of-the-mill investigation insofar you have the data set, and that was the crucial part at the beginning, because email is a private way to communicate with people. It's not like Twitter where everybody can see what you are saying. It's something in between two peers, two or more peers. So it's not OSINT, so to speak. Email doesn't belong to that category. So it really needed the collaboration of all these actors. And, analyzing all of that with the help of research, we could then look at the Telegram channels. It seems to be the overwhelming source of the content. And if you look at the number of mentions in the links, to different platforms. Telegram is by large amount the number one platform that is hosting the fed content. Not necessarily the same channels, but it points to Telegram. And then we started to look at the channels, and we started to look at are there any ways to establish if the same assets were posted by the same persons? And actually we innovated and found a technique looking at the image compression algorithms and some fingerprinting systems that are implemented but not documented by Telegram. We could match and say, okay, so that same person posted that picture in different channels, and basically, long story short, you could establish that just a handful of actors were able to publish multiple Telegram channels, and all of these assets were tied to the same email in the end. So it's really, data analysis, being stubborn and looking at what was the composition of the email, but also the styling, trying to see also if it was translated content or if the end was written originally in English. In some instances, we had also emails written in French. Maybe the operatives know that the French suck at English. I can say it in French. So it was the only country where it was translated. But looking at all these indicators, that helped us try to, understand the chronology which I described earlier in the podcast, in between content creation and then dissemination. But yeah, lessons learned basically is that collaboration is key, and I think also that the operatives are betting on the fact that media entities do not like to share investigations on which they are working for competition purposes, and really wanted to think that there were some thick walls in between newsrooms, so that people could not chatter about what they were working on, and they would have better chances to get more and more articles and fact checks exposing the general public to their fake assets.
One of the interesting aspects of your investigation, it's also exactly to kind of present or showcase these cross-pollination between different platforms, right? Something that a pattern that we've also observed in other case studies that of research and investigations that we've conducted on disinformation campaigns, coordinated disinformation campaigns targeting journalists, right? In the case that, in the sense that there are like certain messaging, being tailored and first disseminated on Telegram channels that have been created, on purpose, or that actually have been employed for a long time, and that, but this kind of helps to rally, let's put it this way, like their acolytes, their forces, and then bringing this same content, to a broader and wider social media platform. In this case, we're talking about X, but in other cases, could perfectly be Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok, right? I found it very, very interesting because in this case, all this was created with the presumption that fact checkers know that. So basically, by doing that, they were providing kind of the credibility to the disinformation campaign, to the campaign, again, to try to attract the attention of the fact checkers. What were the main topics that were employed into this disinformation campaign?
Yeah, so anti-Ukraine content by far was ranked number one. They were using different tactics depending on the target audience. For instance, in Germany, it was mostly like Ukrainian refugee bashing, trying to make believe that Ukrainian refugees are a problem for German society and are verging on the side of being slightly stupid also in the way they behave, like trying to steal fish from a public aquarium, for instance, stuff like that. So trying to turn them into really pulling to alter Germans' perception of Ukrainian refugees. In other countries like France, it was more Zelensky bashing, where There were some anti-Semitic graffitis against Zelensky. There were some associations in between Zelensky and the fact that he used Western money to enrich himself rather than help the Ukrainian war effort. So that was definitely number one topic. Second was France bashing, so basically anti-Macron, anti-French government. Particularly since the French president, publicly said that it wasn't excluded that some troops could go on Ukrainian soil, some Western troops could go there, or at least that it wasn't excluded. That probably hit a nerve somewhere in the process and made it so that France was becoming a target. But another reason also why France would be a target is because of the imminence of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games, which of course is a massive international stage for disinformation. So anything that would diminish France's image internationally is good to take for the operative briefing. But also, it's interesting to look at the type of stories that are disseminated and to try to think about for whom they are curated or for whom they are created. We think that there's a multi-purpose use for those, both for Russian-speaking populations, mostly within Russia, to basically try to present Western countries as countries that had lived their best years, that are more now quite ridiculous. And there's also probably a use in Africa to diminish France's interests in some African countries, because you could see that most of the media brands that were impersonated were internationally recognized media brands like RFI, which is the largest French-speaking world radio, which is in French operation, but has hundreds of millions of listeners around the world and mostly in Africa. Same for on the TV side with France 24, which is the French equivalent to BBC World, and same for Germany, where it was Deutsche Welle. It's the same thing, international news channel in German and English. So that makes us think that there's probably also a will to touch base in Africa and to diminish France's image even more, in the interests of the Russian operations in these countries, mostly in Western Africa and also Central Africa. So, it's probably once the assets are made, they probably are used on several territories to have the best return on investment.
Have you talked to some of these fact-checking organizations to understand the impact of this operation overload? And of course, you were mentioning Deutsche Welle, Agence France Presse, etc., France 24, but of course, those are newsrooms or news outlets, news organizations with a lot of resources, right? But some other smaller fact-checking outlets and were also targeted, right? So I wanted to understand whether you were able to talk to them and to see whether actually this operation was successful in terms of limiting the resources, wasting their limited resources.
Absolutely. The impact assessment was something that we tried to do early on. It's a tricky exercise because small operations don't necessarily keep track of the amount of man-hours that they spend on a specific story. They might have a vague recollection of what they had done. One good metric, though, is the number of articles or assets that were published or mentioning called fake content that we could clear in the operation. So we saw during the the investigation that hundreds of those were posted, mostly in Eastern Europe. A lot of Polish and Ukrainian fact-checking entities had posted on fake graffitis or fake videos that belong to the operation overload. So that's one way to assess the impact. But the question I would ask myself in that sort of situation is, what kind of impact do we want to measure? Is it the impact on the newsrooms, or is it the end goal, which is not necessarily to have the journalists publish, but to have readers be aware of the fake assets? And that is someone that is almost impossible to measure. To see what I mentioned in the top of the podcast. The graffiti is funny, made me laugh. Chances are the idea will stick in my brain, not in a conscious manner, but maybe, next time when I think about a topic, wasn't Zelensky basically just, using all the money for himself? Or, at the Sunday dinner table with the uncle, typical uninformed scenarios where people could try to pick their brain and try to get a sense of a vague topic that they saw flying around, and maybe we remember the funny thing that they saw out of context and shape an opinion about that. So that, of course, is not hard data. So it's very difficult to assess as compared to fact checks which are available on the internet, which indeed are hard data that you can count and then try to see geographically where it was disseminated and things like that. So the impact, I think, is one of the biggest research questions that will occupy us and many universities and researchers in the future, to try to understand how impactful these operations, plural, have on the populations. And if I say that, it's because Operation Overland is one of the operations that we noticed. Some other actors noticed, the famous doppelganger that is also ongoing, which consists of putting up some fake news media websites and propagating some fake information there. There's the network of Pravda networks, which is automated news content in real language in almost all European countries, which belongs to the Portal Combat operation. There are many ongoing operations at the moment, and trying to assess the impact on citizens' brain, and even more difficult to assess the impact on votes, for instance, is something that relies more on soft sciences, which is not our field, basically. But we're happy to contribute to the debate, saying, okay, we've documented that operation, we've documented a bunch of techniques that are being used. That's going to help you recognize both, let's say, the emails, or the technique of content amalgamation, or the technique of making fake graffitis, or adapting to the news cycle. You can learn from that and put in the mix in your next collaborative report. And one idea that we really want to stick into the report's reader's mind is try to foster collaboration across fact checkers, across journalists, but also with the other stakeholders like regulators and the platforms themselves, and because we still have some barriers in between this world. We still have media organizations which are competing. There's an interesting example in geographical Europe, in Norway, where competing newspapers co-funded a fact-checking entity called Hackdisk. And that's basically really quite harsh competitors that are in quotes at war in the media earthquakes, and just working together because they understood that they would benefit more from joining forces into that specific field, rather than trying to have their own fact-check department within their own newsroom. And that is an example that is very common or frequent. There are some ad hoc collaboration efforts. For instance, I remember one in Denmark across private public media organizations in competing private media organizations before elections. but that would be like something that would be set up a few months before and would be dismantled after the elections, and we just go back to normal. So that is refunds, and the perfect illustration to that is the reporter operation that could not exist without the emails that were provided to us through the collaboration of 21st fact-checking organizations, and also the fact that they relayed the operation. We had like a wide press coverage in many countries, dozens of articles to be mentioned and all of that, because we could have local reputable organizations in these countries who published on the day we publicized the report, and that was picked up by many media organizations in their countries. So it's just an example saying that you don't have to share every topic and every subject and basically kill your originality or your advantage news-wise. But when something like that, which is at the heart of the way society works, basically trying to understand why and how we are under attack by foreign actors, how can we collectively resist to that foreign attack? So that transcends competition, basically. And other people, it's my garden, and I prefer behaviors. So, of course, it's a bit of an utopia, but we think we've demonstrated that at least in the fact-checking world we could achieve that, and also gave ideas to others to continue the collaboration, to keep the loop open for further research, but also our contribution. It had to suffer an amendment because we wanted to publish the report before the European elections and before the Olympics, but the operation is still ongoing. But that is the turn also of others to take that knowledge and to build on top of it. As we built on top of AFP and Antibody for Navalny, when in January they published what they saw on X.com, which ended up being linked to Operation Evidence. So what they called Operation Matryoshka was also only considering what was happening on X, but we ended up finding out that it's the same operation. And later on, when the French government agency Vision published an extensive report on Operation Matryoshka and had internal information that we didn't have and AFP didn't have at the time, that just went into the common pool of knowledge about that operation from different angles, and enhances the chances of further researchers to get more details and to better understand what's going on. And it's a little bit like applying the scientific method to journalism and fact-checking in essence, which is we are not competing, we are looking at reality, and the better we know our reality is laid out, the better we can comprehend it and build atop of it.
Absolutely, and also these, this work, your report, your investigation, does not only include the cooperation among different fact-checking organizations and cross-border, including cross-border, like across different countries, but also a cooperation between several different multidisciplinary approaches, to it, because the investigation includes data scientists, include also specialists, etc. So this actually brings about, a very comprehensive and holistic, investigations and definitely results. So you were able to identify, from the domain traceback, to which websites where some of this content was originated, crafted, and so on. So yeah, this kind of cooperation, not only among, news outlets and fact-checking outlets, but also including the expertise from other fields, can actually provide this global picture to the disinformation campaigns. You mentioned, just to finish, you mentioned that the Operation Overload is still running. Have you identified any instances of these ongoing attack in any other fact-checking? Any other fact-checking outlets have been targeted recently? What can you update us on this front?
Well, obviously, the beginning of the Paris 2024 Olympics are a good opportunity for the operatives behind Operation Alert. And just to clarify what I mean by operatives, we did not attribute the operation to anyone. All we can say that it's pro-Russian, and analyzing the links doesn't tell us much, because ultimately they're using either Gmail addresses, so we cannot know who's behind the Gmail account. That's private information. It's protected. Same thing for Telegram user account. We cannot know who created a Telegram account. And same goes for X. The only small sliver of hope is analyzing the Pravda network websites, but that's work that was already done by Visionin. So that's why we say it's a pro-Russian operation, and we cannot really assess who is the entity coordinating or organizing. If it's a collection of different teams, we can have hypotheses about that, saying, okay, there's probably a team that is doing the disinformation, it's probably a team that's doing the content creation, etc., etc. But it's conjecture. It's probable, but we have no hard proof, and we tend to publish about what we have hard proof on. So that's just for the categorization of the attribution, and as I said earlier, it's also up to other ones to continue the work and do the attribution. Or it's more the work of investigative journalists and governments to reclaim was the who's behind someone, and to say we have enough proof to say it was you. And also they have all the means. A government can coerce Google to say, hey, I want to know who's behind that Gmail address. So looking at the actuality of the operation, yes, we are seeing quite a lot of emails, and also other fact-checking entities across Europe, and seeing quite a lot of emails these days revolving around the Olympics. That is something that everybody was thinking about and was prepared to manage. And I'm quite happy to see in my early monitoring that very few fact-checking entities do publish about these assets. Basically, read the report and chose to recognize the emails and ignore them, which is a good thing. But there's a certain fatigue also that can occur, and that is something we have to be vigilant about, because we published a few months back, and even though there was quite a lot of chatter around the report and the warnings that we outlined, people change, teams change, new faces come into organizations, and then at the same time there's the persistence of the operation going on, and also accelerating, because we've seen an increase in the number of assets created since a few weeks and the evenings, and then start of the Olympic Games in Paris. So yes, it's all going. There was a particular episode that got us a little bit frightened a few weeks back, where just after we published the report for the first time and not literally for the first time, but it was a notification of the posting of QR codes together with some tweets from accounts that we had linked to the corpus of accounts belonging to an operation. And one of the trivialities of QR codes is that they can be used anywhere, and we kind of socially have accepted QR codes now. We see them everywhere in public services, in ads, and TV, in magazines, and people don't really think twice before scanning one of these QR codes. The specific QR code that was posted by the Operation Overload operatives didn't lead anywhere, but gave hints of a possible attack surface, and quite a nasty one that could basically take control of your phone or stuff like that. It was not working, but it showed some signs of it being able in the future to work, especially given the fact that the QR code linked to a link shortening service. So in a nutshell, that means that where you are led to can change if the link leads you to google.com on day one. I just changed the link shortener and then can move into some malware or any URL web address I want.
Mm-hmm.
And given the imminence of both the Euro 2024, the Football Euro, and the Olympic Games, we saw a risk of a translation of that tactic, creating QR codes and physical attacks by sticking these QR codes all over Paris, for instance, on poles, and bridges and stuff. That could create a quite dangerous situation in terms of IT security for a lot of the international crowd that is traversing Paris these days. It's a bit soon to see if that was real, but we published a warning about that kind of topic. So that's yet another technique that is being used and should be monitored. So that's why it's important also to have people keeping an eye on the operation, the way it evolves. Is it reaching some platforms? Instagram, we mentioned it earlier, but they were not publishing directly on Insta, but they were mocking the user interface of Instagram to make fake screenshots and goes where TikTok was not used yet in the operation, or at least we did not see it. But these two platforms are possible new avenues for the operation. So, it's there's a trivial part, which is just keep receiving the emails and read them, but there are some other aspects of it that need to be also taken into consideration, and which are more akin to proactive investigation and looking at. We could find some other traces online, for instance, and that should be a common effort. So that's why I'm really happy that you take the time to have me on the podcast, because I know your audience might help also in that adventure.
And the first step to help is to read the current report and as CheckFirst that you did before, which is building on the research and investigation that other fact checkers and news outlets did, to actually take the lead and work on it as well, and cooperatively get in touch with you and with CheckFirst to see how we can run all this together. So I encourage all our audience and whoever is watching this video on YouTube, or whoever is listening this podcast, to go to CheckFirst and the website and read the Operation Overload. There's a very succinct article on the website, but there's a clear link, where you can click and download a report, which, by the way, it's written in a very attractive way in terms of the reading flows very, very well, like as if you are reading like a novel, or with very detailed steps, describing in detail the steps that you took to conduct this investigation. So congratulations on that. Thank you very much, Guillaume Kuster, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Albert.